Very good day to everybody. And I'd like to say that, firstly, that I have great respect for the work of the interpreters. So I will try to speak at a speed that people can handle. But if anybody is having difficulty with interpreting, please let me know and I will speed up or slow down as needed. So, what is the witness of a claim of weakness and dependency to a world where, as Thucydides put it so long ago in the Peloponnesian War, by a law of their nature, whenever people can rule, they will. This law wasn't made by us, and we are not the first who have acted upon it. In this paper, I seek to argue that while society is forced to accommodate limitations on age to a greater extent than some other physical and physical and mental limitations, it often does so grudgingly. By contrast, the Magisterium of Fragility offers a healthier vision of humans at all stages of life and in all conditions, bearing witness to the loving God who works through and in us all. It's difficult for society to escape the inevitability of aging. People inevitably lose capacities they once had and require care where once they didn't. As the World Health Organization notes, people are living longer, and this is inevitably attended by losses in capacity, even though the discrimination which often accompanies those losses is not inevitable. There is an undoubted protection factor which safeguards older people in preference to people whose disabilities are not age-related, because people know that limitations attendant on age will eventually affect nearly all of us. And protection of older people is to the advantage of everyone. After all, today's brash young decision maker will become tomorrow's pensioner. So it was, for example, that when Australian authorities realized that they'd secured insufficient doses of COVID vaccines, they addressed the problem by deprioritizing disabled people whose conditions made them vulnerable to the virus in favor of those in aged care facilities. On a mundane level, most societies have measures in place which are supposed to protect older people, including informal cultural protection, pension schemes, or even dedicated health and other facilities. But while it's true that they may not rank as low on the list of society's priorities as those whose disabilities are not age-related, older people are definitely open to exploitation, discrimination, and abuse. Again, the pandemic provided a very good illustration of this in Australia, with no less a person than Australia's chief medical officer refusing to mandate the wearing of masks in healthcare settings, while describing the early wave of COVID deaths among the elderly as the reaping delayed. The obvious references to the Grim Reaper, the image of death. So the conclusion that even senior authorities regard older people as disposable when their existence is inconvenient can't be escaped. So what does Christianity have to say in response? I've previously noted that limitation, including those attendant on disability and age, whether for the very old or the very young, is a function of human existence. It pertains to all of us on this side of our risen life in Christ. It's this very fact of limitation as an integral part of the human condition and its assumption by Christ in the Incarnation that makes discrimination against people with a disability fundamentally problematic from the point of view of a Christian anthropology. Lumen Gentium 11, which was the Dicastery's suggested starting point for this discussion, already made it clear that the sacraments are for all, and they bind everybody together in the church, regardless of age or state of life. As it says, fortified by so many and such powerful means of salvation, all the faithful, whatever their condition or state, are called by the Lord, each in their own way, to that perfect holiness, whereby the Father himself is perfect. This understanding of the goodness of all created bodies and minds, and their vocation as they are, is reinforced by Article 29, which speaks of the variety of physical, mental, and moral capacities. Varia capacitate physica virumque intellectualium et moralium diversitate, with which people are equipped. While there was therefore good theological precedent for Pope Francis's statement about the value of people in all stages of vulnerability, his was the first voice of the Magisterium to explicitly expose and condemn the way in which elderly and disabled people had been relegated to the role of internal exiles within a community, both church and secular, unwilling to accept the lessons which frailty holds for a humanity often obsessed with the illusion of perfection. In Fratelli Tutti, he explicitly equated the position of elderly and disabled people in this regard, saying, "I'd like to mention some of those hidden exiles who are treated as foreign bodies in society. Many persons with disabilities feel they exist without belonging and without participating. Much still prevents them from being fully enfranchised. Our concerns should be not only to care for them, but to ensure their active participation in the civil and ecclesial community. That's a demanding and even tiring process, but it's one that will gradually contribute to the formation of consciences capable of acknowledging each individual as a unique and unrepeatable person. I think too of the elderly, who also due to their disability are sometimes considered a burden. Yet each of them is able to offer a unique contribution to the common good through their remarkable life stories. Let me repeat, we need to have the courage to give a voice to those who are discriminated against due to their disability, because sadly, in some countries even today, people find it hard to acknowledge them as persons of equal dignity. This point in relation to both elderly and disabled people deserves to be drawn out a little. It is not merely that they, like others, bear the divine image and therefore are owed the same regard as all others, who, as Lumen Gentium said, come with a variety of capacities. Instead, it is these very features of their life history and circumstance, regarded as burdensome by some, which gives them the remarkable life story which enables them to make a unique contribution to the common good. His Magisterium of Fragility elaborated on this in relation to the weakness of elderly people. In his general audience on the 1st of June 2022, he said, "Do not hide frailties. No, it's true they're real, And there's a magisterium of fragility, which old age is able to remind us of in a credible way for the whole span of human life. Do not hide old age. Do not hide the frailty of old age. Again, it's important to read what is being said and what is not. A superficial reading of this text in isolation could view this as a variation of the victim souls theology, the discredited view that weakness and suffering is a privilege, which therefore legitimates the subordinate status of elderly and disabled people as victims of discrimination. That reading is specifically excluded by the context of the quotation. Immediately preceding it, the Pope had condemned discrimination against older people in uncompromising terms, while pointing out the teaching potential that the very fact of fragility holds. Indeed, shame should fall on those who take advantage of the weakness of illness and old age. Prayer renews in the elder's heart the promise of God's faithfulness and God's blessing. The elderly man rediscovers prayer and bears witness to its strength. In the gospel, Jesus never rejects the prayer of those in need of help. By virtue of their weakness, the elderly can teach those living in other stages of life that we all need to abandon ourselves to the Lord, to invoke his help. In this sense, we must all learn from old age. Yes, there is a gift in being elderly, understood as abandoning oneself to the care of others, starting with God himself. It is therefore clear that for Pope Francis it is not exploitable weakness in and of itself that is the magisterium, but rather, firstly, the conscious embrace of that weakness by the older person as an opportunity for opening to divine grace, and secondly, the learning by others that that weakness, far from being something distinctive about the person, as in the victim soul's narrative, reveals a universal truth about the fragility and limitedness of humanity as a whole. In short, the opportunity that aging presents is not to marvel at the elderly as hand-picked victims, but rather for both the aging person and those around them to discover the universal truth of human limitation and concomitant interdependence on each other and on God, and on how these might impact on our experiences of the human condition. In turn, of course, this understanding turns the weakness and dependency of old age into something more than mere vulnerability, more than an invitation to charity or an admonition against discrimination. Seen through the lens of the magisterium of fragility, it becomes a point of discovery of the extent to which all of us are dependent upon each other. And like St. Paul's thorn in the flesh, which he mentions in 2 Corinthians, it becomes a reminder that we're invited to display the infinity of God's strength in the inadequacy of our own. Later on in 2022, in an address for the International Day of Persons with Disability, Pope Francis elaborated on what this means for others. Quoting this very Dicastery submission to the Synod, "The Church is our home," he noted that the mere presence of disabled people can transform institutions and situations, making them more human and welcoming. Of course, it goes without saying that what applies to the limitations inherent in disability applies equally to those inherent in age. Pope Leo XIV reminded us of the function of the Magisterium of Fragility in stripping masks from our limitations, especially in relation to the elderly, in Dilexite, where he noted that The elderly, for example, by their physical frailty, remind us of our own fragility, even as we attempt to conceal it behind our own apparent prosperity and outward appearance. And indeed, in his most recent encyclical, Magnifica Humanitas, paragraph 118, he does the same and points out that, in fact, the limitations of all of us are to be seen not as problems or issues to be overcome, but as actually features revealing the very glory of humanity itself. So in conclusion, the Magisterium of Fragility builds upon the teaching of Vatican II to assert the unconditional value of elderly and disabled life as an integral part of human existence rather than an inconvenience to it. Not only does human weakness teach the person experiencing it at first hand about their limitation and relationship to God, but it also makes a claim on society, whether the church or secular society more broadly, a claim that we both acknowledge the limitations of all of humanity, frankly, and build both church and society more broadly in a way that speaks honestly to that acknowledgement. In short, it leaves no room for us and them, but only for us in God. Thank you for your attention.